Every social reform, every political revolution, and every scientific frontier begins with a single individual who has the audacity to challenge the common rule, the courage to ask the question, why? Today, we call these people pioneers. When we think of pioneers, we think of those who did something very impactful for the first time. We think of those who asked the questions nobody else had asked, did the things nobody else had done. Pioneers are appreciated as members of history, at least in retrospect. One of the most fascinating trends in history is that many of those whom we now celebrate and revere were once mocked and ridiculed. The only reason they are remembered today is because of their persistence in the pursuit of progress. Here's an example. In the 19th century, there was a Hungarian doctor, an obstetrician by the name of Ignaz Semmelweis. Now, throughout the 19th century, as maternal hospitals became more common, the death rate among mothers skyrocketed. At Semmelweis's clinic in Vienna, Austria, the death rate was more than twice that of the other clinic in Vienna. At some point, 1 in 10 mothers was dying of sepsis and uterine infection. In 1847, Semmelweis realized that the midwives in his clinic often worked in the autopsy room, unlike the midwives at the other clinic. He proposed that his hospital implement a hand-washing policy, which they did, and within 2 months, the death rate dropped to 0. Now, you might think that Semmelweis's proposal would immediately be lauded as an incredible medical breakthrough that would save thousands, even millions of mothers' lives. That is not the case. Semmelweis's proposal was received incredibly poorly. For years, he was mocked, ridiculed, and largely rejected because his notions were considered offensive. They didn't cohere with the consensus at the time, as germ theory had yet to be discovered. Even in the midst of the criticism and the ridicule, Semmelweis refused to disavow his claims. Eventually, he became obsessive, and his mental health severely deteriorated to the point of breakdown. He was referred to a mental institution, and the abuse that he experienced there killed him in less than a month. Today, Semmelweis is sometimes referred to as the savior of mothers, and he is widely considered to be a pioneer of antisepsis. Who would have thought that someone so profoundly impactful would be disgraced and dismissed so callously? As I said before, many of those whom we now celebrate and revere were once mocked and ridiculed. We could talk about Socrates, the great moral philosopher whose teachings were accused of corrupting the youth, a claim which ultimately cost him his life. Or maybe Galileo, whose adamant support of an astronomical fact, that the sun is the center of the solar system, what was thought to be the universe at the time, rather than the earth, rendered him a heretic, a claim which resulted in him being placed under house arrest for the remainder of his life. Or a more obscure name, Mary Whiton Calkins, who in 1905 became the first female president of the American Psychological Association, not before being denied a psychology degree from Harvard, for no other reason than the fact that she was a woman. Needless to say, this list goes on. The most famous examples of innovative inquiry were met with retaliation. But in defense of scientific progress, in defense of social progress, and in defense of truth, they persisted. So, you get it. A lot of people from the past are more loved now than they were then. How does this affect us today? Well, it tells us this. The world is always going to have difficult problems to solve, from sustainable farming to cancer treatment options, from child obesity to gang violence. Even when the old ones go, new ones will arise. But human progress isn't just made by the intelligent. It's made by the bold. We learn from these infamous heroes that doing what's right, regardless of how it's perceived, is an act of courage. Today, we name schools after the scandalous, institutions after the ignominious. We erect statues of those who had the fortitude to genuinely seek after social and scientific progress. We commemorate the pariahs who taught us that altruism is courageous and conscientiousness is audacious. Thank you.